What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest action stars sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to discover the host has a hidden agenda that turns a friendly chat into an all-out verbal war? Tonight we dive into the explosive confrontation that left Arnold Schwarzenegger walking off Stephen Colbert's set. And trust me, you need to hear exactly what was said behind those cameras. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below because this story gets wild. The Late Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Arnold Schwarzenegger made his way to the guest chair. The audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the legendary action star and former governor. Stephen Colbert flashed his trademark grin, but something felt different tonight. There was an edge to his smile, a sharpness that seasoned Hollywood veterans learned to recognize. "Arnold Schwarzenegger, welcome back to The Late Show," Colbert began, his voice carrying that familiar comedic cadence. "It's always a pleasure to have you here." Arnold settled into his chair with the confidence of someone who had done 1,000 interviews. "Thank you, Stephen. Great to be back. Your show keeps getting better." "Well, that's very kind of you to say," Colbert replied, shuffling his cards with deliberate slowness. "I have to ask, though, don't you think it's interesting how some people reinvent themselves? I mean, you went from bodybuilder to action star to politician. That's quite the journey of, shall we say, transformations." The way Colbert emphasized transformations sent a subtle chill through the studio. Arnold's media-trained instincts kicked in immediately. "Well, Stephen, I have always believed in challenging myself, you know? Whether it was competing in bodybuilding, making movies, or serving the people of California as governor, I never wanted to stay in one place. Growth requires change." "Growth, yes," Colbert nodded, leaning forward slightly. "But some people might say that kind of constant reinvention suggests a certain, how should I put this, lack of authenticity. Like you're always playing a character, rather than being yourself." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they expected. Arnold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I think authenticity comes from being true to your values, Stephen. Every role I have taken on, whether in movies or in politics, I brought my core beliefs with me. Hard work, determination, helping others achieve their dreams. These things do not change." "Core beliefs," Colbert repeated, his tone taking on a mocking quality. "That's fascinating, because I've been doing some research on your core beliefs, and I have to say, they seem pretty flexible depending on the audience you're addressing." Arnold's eyes narrowed. 20 years of Hollywood politics had taught him to spot an ambush, and this interview was quickly becoming one. "What exactly are you trying to say, Stephen?" "Oh, I'm not trying to say anything, Arnold. I'm saying it. Directly." Colbert's mask of civility was beginning to slip. "You've built your entire career on telling people what they want to hear. Tough guy for the action movies, moderate Republican for California, environmental advocate when it's trendy. Which one is the real Arnold Schwarzenegger?" The audience fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to tense up behind their equipment. Arnold straightened in his chair, his voice dropping to a more serious register. "You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight thinking we were going to have a conversation, not a trial. Every person in public life has different aspects to their personality. That is not being fake. That is being human." "Human, sure," Colbert shot back, his comedic timing now weaponized. "But when you're human in the public eye, people deserve to know who they're really dealing with. And frankly, your track record suggests they're dealing with whatever version of Arnold Schwarzenegger polls best that week." Arnold's famous composure was beginning to crack. His accent became more pronounced, a tell that those close to him recognized as a warning sign. "This is very interesting, Stephen. You invite me on your show as a guest, and then you attack me personally. Is this how you treat all your guests, or am I getting special treatment tonight?" "Special treatment?" Colbert's voice rose mockingly. "Arnold, You're a public figure who's held some of the highest offices in entertainment and politics. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you should stick to movies where someone else writes your lines." The insult landed like a physical blow. Arnold's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried the intensity that had made him famous in dozens of action films. "You think this is tough questions? This is not journalism, Stephen. This is you trying to make yourself look smart by tearing down someone else. Real tough questions come from a place of wanting to understand, not from wanting to destroy." "Destroy?" Colbert laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Arnold, I'm simply pointing out the inconsistencies in your public persona. If that feels like destruction to you, maybe the problem isn't my questions. Maybe the problem is that there's not much substance underneath all that carefully crafted image." The studio had become a pressure cooker. Production assistants looked nervously at each other, unsure whether to intervene. Arnold stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow over Colbert's desk. "You know what your problem is, Stephen? You hide behind comedy to say things you would never have the courage to say to someone's face in a real conversation. You think because you have jokes and a studio audience, that makes you brave. But all I see is a coward who tears down others to build himself up." Colbert's face flushed red. The comedian in him wanted to fire back with a witty retort, but Arnold's words had struck too close to home. Instead, his voice turned cold and vindictive. "Coward? That's rich coming from someone whose biggest political achievement was governing a state that would have elected a golden retriever as long as it had name recognition. You want to talk about courage? How about the courage to admit that your entire career has been built on playing pretend and hoping nobody notices the man behind the muscle is completely empty?" The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Arnold's eyes blazed with an intensity that reminded everyone in the studio why he had been so convincing as an unstoppable killing machine on screen. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with barely contained fury. "You want to know what takes real courage, Stephen?" Arnold's voice cut through the studio silence like a blade. "Real courage is admitting when you are wrong. Real courage is building something instead of just sitting behind a desk every night, making fun of people who actually take risks and try to make a difference in the world." Colbert shifted in his chair, clearly not expecting Arnold to fight back with such intensity. But his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of his own audience. "Oh, please, spare me the inspiration speech," Colbert sneered. "You want to talk about taking risks? The biggest risk you ever took was hoping audiences wouldn't notice you can barely pronounce half the words in your scripts. And as for making a difference, what exactly did you accomplish as governor besides proving that celebrity doesn't translate to competence?" Arnold took a step closer to the desk, his presence filling the small space between them. The studio lights cast dramatic shadows across his face, making him look every inch the intimidating figure he had portrayed in countless films. "You really want to go there, Stephen? Fine. Let me tell you what I accomplished. I took a state that was bankrupt and broken, and I fought every single day to make it better. I worked with Democrats and Republicans because I cared more about solving problems than scoring political points. I passed environmental legislation that became a model for the entire country. I reformed workers' compensation. I invested in stem cell research. I rebuilt our infrastructure. But you know what? You do not care about any of that because it does not fit your little narrative." "Your little narrative," Colbert mocked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Arnold, your entire governorship was a publicity stunt that went on way too long. You threw money at problems and called it leadership. Real governors don't need action movie one-liners to make their point. And real talk show hosts do not ambush their guests with personal attacks disguised as interview questions," Arnold fired back. "You think you are so clever, sitting there with your smug little smile, but everyone in this studio can see exactly what you are doing. You invited me here not because you wanted to have an interesting conversation with your audience, But because you wanted to make me look bad to make yourself look good. The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw animosity flowing between the two men. Several people in the front row looked genuinely uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. Colbert's mask of comedic superiority was slipping further with each exchange. His voice became sharper, more personal. Make you look bad? Arnold, I don't need to make you look bad. Your record speaks for itself. You left California in worse shape than you found it. Your approval ratings were in the toilet. And the only reason people remember your time in office at all is because it was such a spectacular example of what happens when voters confuse fame with qualifications. Arnold's jaw clenched so tightly that veins became visible in his neck. When he spoke, his words came out with deliberate, controlled precision. You know what, Stephen? I have been in this business long enough to recognize jealousy when I see it. You are jealous because I have actually done things with my life, while you just sit here every night making jokes about people who have the courage to step into the arena. You are jealous because when people think of me, they think of someone who achieved the impossible dream, who came to America with nothing and built something incredible. When they think of you, they think of a guy who got lucky enough to get handed a time slot after David Letterman. The insult hit Colbert like a physical slap. His face went from red to pale in seconds, and for the first time in the interview he seemed genuinely rattled. Handed a time slot? Colbert's voice cracked. Slightly. I worked for decades to earn this chair. I built my career one joke at a time, one character at a time, one show at a time. I didn't get here because of my biceps or my accent or my connections in Hollywood. I got here because I am actually talented at what I do. Talented? Arnold laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Stephen, your talent is making people laugh at others. My talent was making people believe they could be heroes. Your talent tears people down. My talent builds people up. We are not the same. Build people up? Colbert's voice rose to almost a shout. You built people up? Arnold, you made movies where you solved every problem by shooting it or blowing it up. You turned politics into another performance where you could play the tough guy. The only thing you built up was your own ego. Arnold's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. He leaned forward, placing both hands on Colbert's desk, bringing his face within inches of the host's. Let me tell you something, Stephen. Those movies you make fun of, they inspired millions of people around the world to believe in themselves, to work hard, to never give up. Those political performances you mock, they brought people together across party lines to actually solve problems. What does your show do? What do you inspire people to do besides sit on their couch and laugh at others? Colbert pushed his chair back slightly, clearly intimidated by Arnold's physical presence, but his wounded pride drove him to escalate even further. At least I'm honest about what I do, Arnold. I don't pretend my entertainment is some kind of public service. I don't wrap my ego in flag and call it patriotism, and I sure as hell don't lecture people about inspiration while building my career on playing characters whose solution to every problem is violence. Violence? Arnold's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You want to talk about violence, Stephen? The violence in my movies was make-believe. The violence you do to people with your words, with your mockery, with your constant need to tear down anyone who dares to be successful, that is real. That hurts real people. At least when I pretended to be a killer on screen, everyone knew it was pretend. When you kill people's reputations and spirits on your show, you smile and call it comedy. The studio had become completely silent except for the hum of the cameras and lights. Even the production crew seemed frozen in place, uncertain whether they should intervene or keep filming. Colbert's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee mug, trying to regain some composure. But Arnold wasn't finished. You know what the real difference is between us, Stephen? When people watch my movies, they leave feeling stronger, feeling like they can overcome any obstacle. When people watch your show, They leave feeling superior to others, feeling like it is okay to mock and belittle anyone who tries to achieve something great. Which one of us do you think makes the world a better place? Colbert set his mug down with shaking hands, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with venom. You think you're some kind of philosopher now, Arnold? Colbert's whispered words carried more poison than his earlier shouts. You think because you can string together a few sentences about inspiration and dreams that somehow makes your shallow existence meaningful? Here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. You're nothing but a relic from a simpler time when audiences were stupid enough to buy tickets just to watch muscles and explosions. The world moved on, but you're still stuck playing the same character you've been playing for 40 years. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Arnold straightened slowly, his massive frame casting an even longer shadow across Colbert's desk. When he spoke, his voice was steady but carried the weight of absolute finality. That is it. That is enough. Arnold's accent was thick now, the way it always became when his emotions ran deepest. Stephen, I have been insulted by critics, by political opponents, by people who wanted to tear me down for their own gain. But I have never, in all my years in public life, encountered someone so bitter, so small, so consumed with their own insecurities that they would use their platform to try to destroy a guest who came here in good faith. Colbert tried to interrupt, but Arnold held up a hand that commanded instant silence. No, you had your chance to talk. Now it is my turn. Arnold's voice filled the studio completely. You want to know what my legacy is? I will tell you. My legacy is every person who watched my movies and decided to start working out, to take better care of their body, to believe they could be strong. My legacy is every immigrant who saw someone with a thick accent and broken English become successful in America and decided to pursue their own dreams. My legacy is environmental legislation that will protect California's air and water for generations. My legacy is bringing Republicans and Democrats together to solve real problems for real people. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. What is your legacy, Stephen? What will people remember about Stephen Colbert 50 years from now? That you were really good at making fun of people? That you could deliver a punchline with perfect timing? That you spent every night of your career sitting in a comfortable chair, making jokes about people who actually had the courage to fail? Colbert's face had gone completely white. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles had turned the same color as his face. You don't know anything about courage, Colbert managed to stammer. You don't know anything about failure. Everything in your life has been handed to you on a silver platter because of how you look, because of your size, because of your accent that people think is charming. Some of us had to earn everything we got through actual talent and hard work. Arnold shook his head sadly, like a disappointed father looking at a child who had just said something particularly foolish. Stephen, you really believe that, not you? You really believe that success just happened to me by accident. Let me educate you about something. I came to America with $70 in my pocket and a dream that everyone told me was impossible. I was told my body was too big. For movies, my accent was too thick for leading roles. My name was too foreign for American audiences. I was told I could never be governor because I was not a real politician. But instead of sitting around making jokes about the people who were actually trying to achieve these things, I worked. I failed more times than you have ever even tried. Anything difficult? He began walking around the desk, moving toward the exit, but his words continued to fill the space. You want to talk about things being handed to me? I worked construction jobs to pay for my training. I slept in gyms because I could not afford an apartment. I took acting classes for years while people laughed at my English. I studied policy and economics and law to prepare for government service. What did you do to prepare for this job, Stephen? Learn how to make funny faces and read jokes other people wrote for you? Colbert finally found his voice again, but it came out as a desperate shout. At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not. At least I don't lecture people about hard work and dreams while living in a fantasy world where everything I touch turns to gold." Arnold stopped walking and turned back to face Colbert one final time. His voice was calm now, almost gentle, which somehow made his words even more devastating. "Stephen, the saddest part about this whole conversation is that you actually believe what you are saying. You have convinced yourself that success is just luck, that achievement is just privilege, that anyone who accomplishes something great must be fake or shallow or lucky. And you know why you believe that? Because it is easier than admitting that you chose the safe path. It is easier than acknowledging that while some people were taking risks and building things and trying to make a difference, you chose to sit on the sidelines and make jokes." He moved toward the studio exit, his security detail materializing from the shadows to escort him out. "You know what, Stephen? I actually feel sorry for you. Because at the end of the day, when you go home tonight, you're going to realize that you just spent 30 minutes of national television trying to tear down someone whose only crime was being successful. And your audience, these people who came here to be entertained, they just watched you reveal exactly who you really are underneath all the comedy and charm." Colbert stood up behind his desk, his voice cracking as he called out desperately, "Running away, Arnold? I thought action heroes were supposed to be tougher than that." Arnold paused at the studio door and looked back one final time. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent studio with perfect clarity. "Stephen, there is a difference between running away and refusing to waste any more time on someone who is not worth it. You have shown your audience tonight exactly what kind of person you are. My work here is done." The studio door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any explosion from his movies. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply leave. Colbert stood alone behind his desk, the bright studio lights suddenly feeling harsh and unforgiving. For the first time in his career, Stephen Colbert was completely speechless. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his humiliation, but no clever comeback emerged. No witty observation could salvage what had just happened. He had invited Arnold Schwarzenegger onto his show intending to embarrass him, and instead had revealed his own petty jealousy and insecurity to millions of viewers. The silence stretched on until finally, mercifully, someone yelled, "Cut!" from behind the cameras. But the damage was already done. In trying to prove that Arnold Schwarzenegger was nothing but an empty suit, Stephen Colbert had instead proven that when stripped of his writers and his prepared material and his carefully controlled environment, he was the one with nothing substantial to offer. The story you just heard shows what happens when someone lets their ego write checks their talent cannot cash. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked out of that studio with his dignity intact, while Stephen Colbert was left to face the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the people we try to tear down are standing on much higher ground than we realized. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this, and comment below with your answer to this question. Do you think Stephen Colbert ever recovered from this public humiliation, or did this moment change how audiences saw him forever?